Today we're going to build and paint the Sarissa Percision's Old West Church/School. So we have the Old West Schoolhouse Church/Church. Now this can be built either way, the same. The only difference is the crosses or no crosses. And you have a schoolhouse without them, a church with them. But I have two of these kits, so because I wanted a schoolhouse and a church all in the same town. So today we're gonna build the church, and it's built exactly the same way as the schoolhouse. And if you look on the back of this sheet here is your instructions on how to build. The first thing we're gonna do is we're going to put all the windows and door surrounds, the pieces that, make up the window, the trim. We're gonna put all those pieces separately on there. Then we're gonna build our roof. Then we're going to build our steps and put our base on the stilts. Then we're gonna put on the walls, and we're ready for the roof after that to put on top, and then we'll build both gables. So that's how we're gonna do this in this video. The first step, obviously, is to start punching out all of your pieces out of the MDF sprues with the steps, and you have these gables and the trusses for underneath the church. I'm using a hobby knife. I recommend that because this is a much thicker MDF than your others. It's a little bit thicker, I should say. It's probably about 4 or 5 mil. And then you will organize your pieces, looking at your instructions, of course, based on how you're going to assemble it and putting your pieces together. If you were building, a model kit, which you are, as if you're building a figure. So I gather all the pieces together, make sure they're all there, and then I begin to build the model. So the first thing I always do is I always put the trim pieces around the windows and doors first before I glue the whole thing together. Just makes life easier. You can actually hold the pieces in your hands a lot steadier, and it's not big and bulky. But they also recommend that in the instructions as well. And once you got all those glued on, you set them aside and you begin to build the roof section. And I would tell you to look at your instructions. I will tell you to look at your instructions very carefully at how this is put together, because one piece overlaps the other at the peak. And they'll fit together like that. I just wanted to point that out here because later on when we do the gable on the front of the church, and when we do the bell tower on the church, you're gonna have to overlap those pieces to where they're even, as we'll see later. Just putting a little extra glue to reinforce it. And then we're gonna build our steps, our back steps. You build this. I used way too much glue here. You don't need that much. It just kind of came out that way. But you just stack them together for the back door. The next step is to assemble your bottom frame pieces to the bottom of the church, which is our thicker MDF that we use there, so they fit kind of tightly. If you can't press them in easily, you need to sand them down or shave the edges. And here's a look at what it looks like when it's all done. Put all of those in, give the glue some time to dry, and then we'll move on to the front gable, which we're putting the step on. Now check your instructions, take a look at it very carefully. In the instructions it shows you the exact placement of how it goes in on the front gable with one step, basically. This is the front of the front gable area. Then we build the sides. We're putting the sides on. You put the front and then the back onto the church first, and then put the side walls on. And the reason for this is the side walls will just, pop in just like that. And the front you actually have to put into place in order for those connectors on the corners to connect properly. Then we're going to install our front gable piece, our back gable piece, I should say, around the door. just like so. And then we're going to glue our front piece on, which is fairly simple. Follow your instructions to see how it goes on there. Play with it, dry fit it first, and it should work. After that, put the roof on, make sure it overlaps and it's even overhang on the whole gable. After that, we're going to be putting on our handrails, which go on either side. We'll dry fit it, of course, which we did do. And we're going to place them in the sides on either side of that front gable area. Once we have that in, it's looking pretty good. It's starting to look like a church on the front, which is pretty awesome. If I can get it to stick, which I do eventually. The next step is to glue our top bell tower gable. And it's a little flimsy at first. You got to hold them there for a couple minutes with the super glue, or a couple seconds with the super glue. And just hold it there as straight as you possibly can. And once it starts actually tacking, you can actually glue the other side of the bell tower on. And I'd recommend putting a rubber band around it for a little while, but you don't have to. Also, we're going to put our roof on it. And remember, when you put the roof on the bell tower, to overlap the pieces and just kind of eyeball it to make sure that they're even. But the roof does overlap. And then glue it onto your church. It's starting to look finished. All we got to do is put the crosses on there for the church on the front gable and the bell tower gable. Such so. You don't have to put these pieces on the way they are instructed. You can actually shave off the bottom and just put it on the front of the building on that big open area if you really wanted to. But I thought, you know what? They got them in the kit. I'm going to go ahead and use them exactly the way they have it in the picture. Our final step is to glue the steps onto the back door. And you got to really shave that down on the back because it has those cut-off points from the sprue, and just glue it into place. Once that's in place, our church is now finished. It's all built and we are ready to paint it up. A lot of reference photos show white churches. So we're going to use my white triad from Vallejo Model Color, pastel green, green gray, and ivory to paint the church. So when painting the church, what we're going to do is, like I showed you with the paints, we're going to paint everything except for the roofs completely white. And it's going to be kind of like a wash, and it's going to look like a wash, a white wash, but some of the wood is going to show through. And then we're going to dry brush with our other colors of white. We might even put a black wash over the top of the white itself and then dry brush again. But at this point, you don't need any primer to start. You can just start painting over that and the wood will bleed through that white. But we'll see how it turns out after our first coat. So I use a color pastel green, and I start, covering the whole church with pastel green. And pastel green is a cool color. It's a kind of a darker, like a really, really bright green, I guess you can call it. But it's an absolute awesome base for a white building to start off with pastel green. And away we go. Just paint everything but the roofs white. The roof we're going to do probably in a deep sea green to start off with. And the roofs are pretty easy to do for the most part. But we're just doing a simple paint job on the church, and we're going to get it done. All right, there we have our white. This is done in a pastel green, really. It's not really a white, but when you put it on the table next to other miniatures, it really has the look of a white color or a worn wood. Now you could highlight this, you could further take the next color like green gray, but I'm so impressed with the way this looks right now. It looks like an old church, and that wood is bleeding through onto the side of the actual windows and the doors, and it's bleeding through to the point to where it looks like a whitewash. And I'm afraid if I do some kind of dry brush on it or a highlight with another color, that it'll take away from that. As you can see how the wood's kind of bleeding through. It looks like it's a whitewash on the actual thing itself. So the next step after that, because we're going to leave that alone, we're just going to keep it the way it is. But like I said, if you want to highlight it further, green gray is your color to highlight the pastel green. And it will give it a highlight in the corners and stuff like that. But the next color we're going to use, we're going to paint this roof. And I've been toiling with it in my mind, and I think we're going to go with a gray roof. We're going to use Balsalt Gray, and we're going to dry brush it with a neutral gray with downward strokes. As you can see, I'm using a downward motion on my brush strokes with the Balsalt Gray to give it the look of a shingles or some sort of wooden shingles, and putting grain in there. You'll see the brush strokes that way. And after that, we're going to take a dark tone, or a Nuln Oil if you want, and a Athenial Camel Shade, which has a hint of green. And this is why I used Balsalt Gray, because Balsalt Gray is a really brighter gray than the normal, dark gray that I would put on a roof. And this is really going to take it down. And as you can see, I'm putting streaks just like so with a flat brush to make it look like water's coming down, and a little bit of water damage, and that's your final result right there. So with all the streaks done and on the roof itself, we're gonna go ahead and highlight the white with a green gray from Vallejo Model Color Green Gray. And as you can see, it gives it a little bit slight more like the paint's faded underneath. We're just gonna do a dry brush, and my brush is no left or right, just all over the place. Adding a little bit of a highlight to that white, making it look even more weathered, like I did for the roof, basically, or what I'm going to do for the roof. Once the weathering is all dry on the roof, we're going to take our first color, Balsalt Gray, and we're going to do a light dry brush. We're going to do this in an up and down pattern like we did for our original painting base coat, and just directly over the weather. And don't do it everywhere, just kind of mix it up a little bit. Dry brushing it on the roof. We're just kind of bringing back that underneath color over the top to brighten it up a little. And then we're going to take our neutral gray and do a all over the place, no set pattern or anything, just little spots of a neutral gray to highlight the roof a little more and weather it a little bit more. Sort of like rain running over it, and it just kind of fades out the color. And then once that's done, we are finished with our building. So thank you for watching, and last but not least, from me to you, ta-ta!